Boy with hearing disability impresses George Strait, and what he did moved everyone. The morning sun peeked through the faded blue curtains in Leo's room, casting a warm glow across the collection of George Strait posters that lined the walls. Leo had been awake for hours already, his small hands pressed against the speaker of his old CD player as the vibrations from Amarillo by Morning traveled through his fingertips and into his soul. His mother, Elena, watched from the doorway, her heart swelling with a familiar mixture of pride and pain. At 10 years old, her son had already faced more challenges than most adults, but his passion for music he couldn't hear in the conventional sense, never ceased to amaze her. Elena smiled as Leo closed his eyes, his body swaying slightly to a rhythm only he could feel. Born with profound hearing loss, Leo had never experienced sound the way others did. But that hadn't stopped him from developing an extraordinary connection to music, particularly the songs of George Strait, the undisputed king of country music. "Leo," Elena signed, her hands moving gracefully through the air. "Breakfast is ready." Leo looked up, his bright eyes focusing on his mother's hands. He nodded enthusiastically and turned off his CD player with a reluctance that made Elena chuckle. He carefully placed the George Strait CD back in its case before joining his mother in the kitchen of their modest home in Riverdale, a small town where everyone knew everyone, and where Leo's condition had always made him something of an anomaly. Their kitchen was small but warm, filled with the scent of fresh pancakes and the morning light that filtered through the window above the sink. As Leo sat down at the table, Elena placed a plate in front of him, arranging the pancakes into a smiley face with blueberry eyes that made Leo grin. "Guess what came in the mail yesterday?" Elena signed, her movements deliberately slow to build suspense. Leo's eyes widened with curiosity. He loved surprises, especially when his mother had that particular gleam in her eye. Elena reached into her pocket and pulled out 2 tickets, holding them up for Leo to see. For a moment Leo stared at them, uncomprehending. Then his eyes caught the name printed in bold across the top. George Strait, Intimate Acoustic Session. His jaw dropped open. His hands began to move so quickly that Elena had to ask him to slow down. "Are those real?" he signed, his fingers trembling with excitement. "Are we really going to see George Strait?" Elena nodded, her smile as bright as the sun streaming through the window. "I entered that contest the radio station was running. I didn't think we had a chance, but we won. We're going to see him next week at the old theater downtown." Leo jumped from his chair, his breakfast forgotten. He threw his arms around his mother's neck, squeezing so tight that Elena had to gently loosen his grip. When he pulled back, there were tears in his eyes, and Elena felt her own eyes welling up in response. "But that's not all," she signed. "These are special tickets. We'll be sitting close to the stage, where you can feel the vibrations better. And after the show, there's a small meeting with a few lucky fans. We might actually get to meet him, Leo." Leo's hands flew to his mouth, his eyes as round as saucers. The possibility of meeting George Strait was beyond anything he had ever dared to dream. His heart pounded so hard in his chest that he was sure his mother could hear it. In the days that followed, Leo was consumed by preparations for the concert. He spent hours in front of the mirror, practicing what he would sign to his mother. To translate to George Strait if they met, he meticulously selected his outfit, a miniature version of the cowboy attire that George Strait was known for, complete with a small cowboy hat and boots that Elena had found at a thrift store. The night before the concert, Leo could barely contain his excitement. He lay in bed, his worn copy of George Strait's biography clutched to his chest, his mind racing with possibilities. What would it be like to be in the same room as his hero? Would he be able to feel the music the way he did at home, with his hands pressed against his speakers? Would George Strait understand what his music meant to a boy who had never heard a single note? Elena watched her son from the doorway, her heart full. Leo's passion for music had always been a source of amazement for her. When he was just a toddler, she had noticed how he would press his hands against the radio, his face lighting up as he felt the vibrations. She had encouraged this connection, learning to translate lyrics into sign language, describing the emotions and stories behind the songs, and helping Leo understand the world of music that existed beyond sound. George Strait had become Leo's idol after Elena had shown him a concert video when he was 7. There was something about the way the man stood on stage, confident yet humble, that had captivated Leo. He had watched that video so many times that Elena had had to replace the DVD. He knew every movement, every expression on George Strait's face, and had memorized the lyrics to dozens of his songs. When the day of the concert finally arrived, Leo was up before dawn, too excited to sleep. He spent an extra long time getting ready, making sure his cowboy hat was tilted at just the right angle and his boots were perfectly polished. He packed his small backpack with care, including a notebook where he had written a letter to George Strait, with Elena's help, explaining how much his music meant to him despite his inability to hear it in the traditional sense. As they drove downtown, Leo pressed his face against the window, watching as the familiar buildings of Riverdale gave way to the slightly more bustling area where the old theatre stood. The marquee was already lit up, announcing George Strait sold out in bright letters that made Leo's heart skip a beat. The theatre was smaller than Leo had imagined, but that only made it more special. This wasn't a massive arena concert. This was an intimate gathering of true fans, and Leo knew that made their chance of actually meeting George Strait much greater. As they approached the entrance, Elena felt a flutter of anxiety. She had called ahead to explain Leo's situation, wanting to ensure that they would be seated in a location where Leo could best experience the concert. The woman she had spoken to had been kind and understanding, assuring her that they would do everything possible to accommodate Leo's needs. But as they entered the theatre's grand foyer, with its high ceilings and elegant chandeliers, Elena was struck by how many people were already there. The crowd was a sea of cowboy hats and boots, everyone buzzing with excitement about the rare opportunity to see George Strait in such an intimate setting. "Do you want to try to find our seats now or wait a bit?" Elena signed to Leo, who was taking in the scene with wide-eyed wonder. "Now!" Leo signed back emphatically. "I want to be as close as possible when he comes on stage." Elena nodded and took Leo's hand, guiding him through the crowd toward the entrance to the main theatre. She showed their tickets to an usher, who directed them toward a door at the side of the building. "Special seating is through there," the usher said, pointing. "Someone will help you find your exact seats." Elena thanked him and led Leo through the door, which opened into a smaller corridor. At the end of the corridor stood a man in a black shirt with staff printed across the back. He was middle-aged, with a perpetual frown that deepened as he saw Elena and Leo approaching. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone suggesting he would rather be doing anything else. "We have tickets for the special seating area," Elena explained, showing him their tickets. "I called ahead about my son. He's deaf, and we were told we could be seated somewhere where he could feel the vibrations from the music better." The man looked at Leo, his expression shifting from indifference to something that made Elena's stomach tighten, a mix of disbelief and disdain. "Deaf?" he repeated, as if she had said something absurd. "And you're bringing him to a concert?" Elena felt Leo tense beside her. Though he couldn't hear the words, he was adept at reading body language and facial expressions, and the man's dismissive attitude was clear. "Yes," Elena said firmly, "he loves music, especially George Strait's. He feels it through vibrations," and the man cut her off with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Look, lady, I've been working these events for 15 years. A concert is for hearing people. It's not a place for—" He gestured vaguely at Leo, who was watching the exchange with growing distress. Elena felt heat rising to her face. "For what?" she challenged. "For children who love music. For fans who have supported George Strait for years. My son knows every song, every album. He may not hear the music the way you do, but he feels it more deeply than most people ever will." A small crowd had gathered around them, drawn by the rising tension. The staff member looked uncomfortable now, but he didn't back down. "The rules are the rules," he said stiffly. "You need to go to your assigned seats and not cause any disruption. This is a professional event, not a charity case." Leo tugged at his mother's sleeve, his eyes questioning. Elena was too upset to sign properly, and Leo could see tears forming in her eyes. He knew something was wrong, very wrong, and it was about him. "Is there a problem here?" The voice came from behind them, and Elena turned to see another staff member, a young woman with kind eyes and a genuine smile. "I was just explaining that this isn't really the place for," the male staff member began, but the woman cut him off. "For devoted fans?" She finished for him, her voice sweet but with an edge that made it clear she had heard enough. "I think that's exactly who this place is for." She turned to Elena and Leo. "I'm Jamie, part of the production team. You must be Elena and Leo. We've been expecting you." Elena felt a rush of relief, but it was tempered by the humiliation they had just experienced. Leo was looking between the three adults, trying to understand what was happening. Jamie crouched down to Leo's level. "Your mom tells me you're a big George Strait fan," she said, her hands moving in perfect sign language that made Leo's eyes widen in surprise and delight. He nodded enthusiastically, signing back, "He's the best. I know all his songs." Jamie laughed. "Well, you're in for a treat tonight. We've got a special spot for you where you can really feel the music." She stood and gave the male staff member a cold look. "Frank, I think you're needed at the main entrance. I'll take care of our VIP guests here." Frank hesitated, then stalked, off without another word, leaving Elena standing there with a mixture of gratitude and lingering hurt. "Don't mind him," Jamie said, her voice lowering. "Some people just don't understand. But I do. My brother is hard of hearing and he's a musician. Music is universal. It's not just about what you hear with your ears." Elena blinked back tears as she translated Jamie's words for Leo, whose face lit up at the mention of Jamie's brother. "Really?" he signed excitedly. "He's a musician." "What? Does he play?" As Jamie answered, leading them through a side door and into the main theatre, Elena felt some of the tension leaving her body. But she couldn't shake the feeling of shame and anger that Frank's words had created. She had protected Leo from so much negativity over the years, carefully constructing a world where his differences were celebrated rather than derided. To have that bubble burst so callously and at an event that should have been magical was heartbreaking. The theatre was beautiful, with plush red seats and ornate golden details along the walls and ceiling. Jamie led them to seats that were indeed special, positioned near the stage, but also close to one of the large speakers. "These seats are perfect for feeling the vibrations," Jamie explained. "And the sightlines are great too. You'll be able to see every expression on George's face." Leo was bouncing with excitement again, the unpleasant encounter with Frank seemingly forgotten as he took in the grandeur of the theatre and the proximity to the stage where his hero would soon be performing. "And there's something else," Jamie added, her eyes twinkling. "George always likes to know who's in the audience, especially at these smaller shows. I might have mentioned that we have a very special young fan attending tonight." Elena's heart skipped a beat. "You told George Strait about Leo?" Jamie nodded. "I can't promise anything, but, well, George is known for his big heart. You never know what might happen." As Jamie left them to attend to other duties, promising to check on them later, Elena helped Leo get settled in his seat. The theatre was filling up now, the excited murmur of the crowd growing louder as showtime approached. Leo couldn't hear the anticipation in the air, but he could feel it in the way people moved, in the increasing energy that seemed to vibrate through the very walls of the theater. His own excitement was almost overwhelming, his hands fidgeting with the program Jamie had given him, which featured a large photo of George Strait on the cover. Elena watched her son, her heart full. Despite the incident with Frank, this night was already special. Leo was experiencing something he had only dreamed about, and the possibility that George Strait himself might know about Leo's presence made it even more magical. The house lights dimmed, and a hush fell over the crowd. Leo looked at his mother questioningly, and she signed, "It's starting." Leo's eyes grew wide, and he placed his hands flat on the armrests of his seat, ready to feel the music through the vibrations that would soon pulse through the theater. As the first notes of the opening act filled the air, Leo closed his eyes, letting the vibrations wash over him. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. Somewhere in this building was George Strait, preparing to take the stage. And Leo, against all odds, was here to experience it. Elena watched her son, marveling at the pure joy on his face. In that moment, she knew that whatever happened next, bringing Leo here had been worth it. This was a night they would both remember, for the rest of their lives. What neither of them knew was that the night was about to become even more memorable than they could have ever imagined. The opening act was a young singer with a voice like honey and a guitar that sparkled under the stage lights. Elena watched as Leo's hands stayed firmly pressed against the armrests of his seat, his face a picture of concentration as he absorbed the vibrations flowing through the theater. Occasionally, he would look up at her with a wide smile that made her heart soar. Elena signed the lyrics as best she could, translating the emotions and stories in the songs into movements that Leo could understand. It was something they had practiced countless times at home, their own private way of sharing music. Halfway through the opening act, Elena noticed Frank, the rude staff member from earlier, standing at the side of the stage. He was watching them, his expression unreadable from this distance. Elena felt a flicker of anger, but pushed it aside. She wouldn't let anything ruin this night for Leo. As the opening act finished to enthusiastic applause, Leo looked at Elena expectantly. "Is it time for George Strait now?" he signed, his eyes bright with anticipation. Elena nodded. "Yes, soon," she signed back. "How are you feeling the music? Can you feel it well from here?" Leo's face lit up. "It's amazing," he signed enthusiastically. "Much better than at home. I can feel every beat through the floor and the chair." He placed his hands on the floor, closing his eyes briefly to demonstrate. "It's like the music is inside me." Elena smiled, her eyes misting slightly. Moments like these reassured her that despite the challenges Leo faced, he was experiencing life in his own rich and meaningful way. The house lights dimmed further, plunging the theater into near darkness. A spotlight appeared on the stage, and the crowd erupted in cheers as George Strait walked out, guitar in hand, his signature cowboy hat casting a shadow over his face until he looked up and smiled at the audience. Leo couldn't hear the roar of the crowd, but he could feel the surge of energy in the room, the vibrations of hundreds of people stomping their feet and clapping their hands. He could see George Strait, his hero, the man whose face had looked down at him from posters in his bedroom for years, standing just feet away, real and alive, and about to play music just for them. Leo's hands flew to his mouth in astonishment, and Elena had to steady him as he nearly bounced out of his seat with excitement. George Strait adjusted his microphone and spoke to the crowd, his voice warm and genuine. "Good evening, folks. It's good to be here in Riverdale tonight. There's something special about these smaller shows. Getting to see all your faces up close makes me remember why I started doing this in the first place." Elena quickly translated his words for Leo, whose eyes never left the stage. "This first," Song is an oldie but a goodie, George continued, strumming his guitar. I think you might know it. The opening chords of Amarillo by Morning filled the theatre, and the crowd cheered in recognition. It was one of George Strait's most beloved classics, and as chance would have it, Leo's absolute favourite song. Leo's face transformed with pure joy. He immediately recognized the pattern of vibrations, the rhythm that he had felt hundreds of times with his hands pressed against his CD player at home. He began to move his body slightly in time with the music, his eyes closed in concentration as he savored every vibration. Elena watched her son, tears forming in her eyes. This was everything she had hoped for when she'd entered that radio contest. Seeing Leo experience his favorite song, performed live by his hero, was worth every sacrifice she had ever made. As the concert continued, George Strait moved through his extensive catalogue of hits. Between songs, he shared stories and jokes with the audience, all of which Elena faithfully translated for Leo. The intimate setting made it feel as if George was having a conversation with each person in the room, creating a warmth and connection that wouldn't have been possible in a larger venue. During a brief pause while George swapped guitars, Elena noticed Jamie approaching their seats. She leaned down to speak to Elena, her voice barely audible over the ambient noise of the crowd. "How's everything going? Is Leo enjoying the show?" she asked. Elena nodded emphatically. "It's incredible. I've never seen him so happy." Jamie smiled. "I mentioned Leo to George's manager, and he passed it along. George was really touched by Leo's story. He's a big believer in music being for everyone." Elena's heart skipped a beat. "Does that mean—" Jamie held up a hand. "I can't promise anything specific, but keep your eyes open. George likes to acknowledge special fans when he can." With that cryptic message, Jamie disappeared back into the shadows of the theatre, leaving Elena with a flutter of hope in her chest. As the concert progressed, Leo remained completely engrossed, his body tuned to the vibrations of each song, his eyes fixed on George Strait's every movement. Elena continued to translate lyrics and comments, but there were moments when Leo seemed to understand the emotions of a song without any translation at all, moments when the pure feeling of the music transcended the barrier of sound. About 3/4 of the way through the show, George Strait took a moment to address the audience again. "You know, music is a funny thing," he said, his voice thoughtful. "It touches people in different ways. Some folks connect with the lyrics, some with the melody, some just like the way it makes them feel inside." Elena translated quickly for Leo, whose attention was rapt. "I've been fortunate enough to play for all kinds of audiences over the years," George continued. "And one thing I've learned is that music isn't just about what you hear with your ears. It's about what you feel in your heart." There was something in his tone that made Elena pay closer attention. She glanced around and noticed that Jamie was now standing at the edge of the stage, watching them with a smile. "I heard a story tonight that really moved me," George said, adjusting his hat slightly. "About a young fan in the audience who feels my music in a different way than most folks." Leo tugged at Elena's sleeve, his eyes questioning. She signed quickly, her hands shaking slightly with sudden anticipation. "He's talking about you, Leo." Leo's eyes widened in disbelief. "This young man can't hear the notes I play or the words I sing," George continued. "But from what I understand, he knows my songs better than some of my band members." This drew laughter from the crowd and a bashful smile from one of the guitarists. "His name is Leo, and he's 10 years old. Leo experiences music through vibrations and through the love of his mother, who translates the stories in my songs for him. And I think that's just about the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." As Elena translated, Leo's expression transformed, from shock to utter joy. Tears welled in his eyes, and Elena felt her own cheeks grow wet. George Strait, the George Strait, was acknowledging Leo from the stage, celebrating his unique way of experiencing music. "So, Leo," George said, peering, out into the audience. "If you're out there, I'd like to play something special for you. This song has a lot of bass, so you can really feel it. And it's about never giving up no matter what challenges life throws your way. It seems fitting." He nodded to his band, and they began to play "I Saw God Today," a song with a powerful message about finding beauty and miracles in unexpected places. The bass was indeed prominent, sending strong vibrations through the floor and seats of the theater. Leo placed his hands on the armrests and closed his eyes, his face a portrait of pure bliss as he absorbed the vibrations of a song being played specifically for him. Elena could hardly believe what was happening. This moment, this magical, unexpected moment, would be etched in both their memories forever. When the song ended, the audience erupted in applause. George Strait tipped his hat in their direction, a gesture that felt deeply personal despite the hundreds of people around them. Leo was beaming, his hands moving rapidly as he signed to Elena. "Did that really happen? Did he really play that song for me?" his fingers asked, trembling with emotion. "Yes, sweetheart," Elena signed back, her own hands shaking. "He really did. He knows you're here, and he wanted to do something special for you." Leo's expression was one of pure wonder, as if he'd just witnessed the impossible. In many ways, Elena thought he had. A world-famous musician had not only acknowledged his presence, but had celebrated his different way of experiencing music, validating everything Leo had felt about George Strait's songs all these years. The concert continued, but there was a new energy in the air. Elena noticed people around them glancing their way, smiling warmly at Leo. The same people who might have once stared with curiosity or pity at a deaf child were now seeing Leo in a new light, as someone special, someone worthy of George Strait's personal attention. As the show neared its end, George Strait played his encore, a medley of his greatest hits that had the audience on their feet. Leo stood too, his body swaying with the music, his face radiant with joy. Elena watched him, thinking about how far they had come. Not just the physical journey to this theater, but the emotional journey of raising a child who experienced the world differently, of fighting for his right to that experience, of celebrating his unique perspective rather than mourning what he lacked. When the final notes faded and George Strait took his bow, the audience cheered wildly. Leo couldn't hear the cheers, but he could see the standing ovation, the hands clapping, the faces alive with appreciation. He clapped too, as hard as he could, his contribution to the wave of gratitude flowing toward the stage. As the house lights came up and people began to gather their belongings, Jamie reappeared at their side. "That was something, wasn't it?" she said, her eyes twinkling. "But it's not over yet. I need you two to come with me." Eleanor's heart began to race. "Where are we going?" Jamie's smile widened. "George asked to meet Leo personally. He's waiting backstage." Leo, who had been watching Jamie's lips and Elena's signing, froze in place, his eyes growing impossibly wide. Meeting George Strait had been his ultimate dream, but after the public acknowledgement during the show, it had seemed like too much to hope for. "Really?" Elena asked, hardly daring to believe it. "He wants to meet Leo?" Jamie nodded. "Really?" He was very specific about it, said he wanted to meet the young man who feels his music so deeply. Elena translated for Leo, whose hands flew up to cover his mouth in shock. Then he began signing so rapidly that Elena had to ask him to slow down. "Is this real?" he kept signing. "Are we really going to meet George Strait? What will I say to him? What if I can't express what his music means to me?" Elena took his hands in hers, steadying them. "Just be yourself," she signed. "That's all you need to be." Jamie led them through a side door and down a narrow hallway lined with old show posters. Leo walked as if in a trance, his eyes darting everywhere, taking in every detail of this behind-the-scenes world he had only imagined. They stopped at a door marked Green Room. Jamie knocked twice, then opened it, gesturing for Elena and Leo to enter. The room was modest but comfortable, with a small sofa, a few chairs, and a table laden with bottles of water and light snacks. And there, standing in the center of the room, still wearing his cowboy hat and stage clothes, was George Strait. Leo froze in the doorway, unable to believe his eyes. Elena gently placed her hands on his shoulders, steadying him. George Strait smiled warmly and stepped forward, extending his hand first to Eleanor. "You must be Eleanor," he said. "It's a pleasure to meet you. I've heard you're quite the translator." Eleanor shook his hand, struggling to find her voice. "Thank you, Mr. Strait. It's an honor to meet you. What you did tonight, acknowledging Leo from the stage, I can't tell you what that meant to us." George Strait's smile deepened, creating crinkles around his eyes. "Please, call me George." He then crouched down slightly to be at eye level with Leo. "And you must be Leo. I've been looking forward to meeting you, young man." Elena quickly translated his words, and Leo stared at George Strait with awe, his hands trembling slightly as he signed his response. "He says, 'It's a dream come true to meet you,'" Elena translated. "He's been your biggest fan since he was 7 years old." George nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Jamie tells me you know all my songs, that you feel them through vibrations. I think that's pretty amazing." As Elena translated, Leo's face lit up. He began to sign enthusiastically, and Elena translated, "Your music feels different from other music. It has a special rhythm, a special feeling. I can feel the stories in your songs, even when I can't hear the words." George Strait looked genuinely moved. "That might be the nicest thing anyone's ever said about my music," he said. He gestured to a chair. "Would you like to sit down? I'd love to hear more about how you experience music." They sat, and for the next several minutes, Leo shared with George Strait, through Elena's translations, his unique relationship with music. He explained how he placed his hands on speakers to feel the vibrations, how he studied lyric sheets and music videos to understand the stories, how certain songs created distinctive patterns of vibration that he could recognize instantly. George Strait listened with genuine interest, asking questions and nodding thoughtfully at Leo's responses. At one point, he picked up a guitar that was leaning against the wall. "I'm curious about something," he said. "Would you like to feel how the music is created, directly from the source?" When Elena translated this, Leo nodded eagerly, his eyes wide with excitement. George Strait strummed a chord and then motioned for Leo to come closer. "Place your hand here, on the body of the guitar," he said, pointing to the wooden soundbox. Leo hesitantly placed his palm against the guitar, and George Strait played a few notes. Leo's face transformed with wonder as he felt the vibrations flowing directly from the instrument, through his hand and into his body. It was a more immediate and intimate connection to the music than he had ever experienced. "That's amazing," Leo signed, his movements quick with excitement. "I can feel every note. It's clearer than through speakers or floors." George Strait smiled, clearly touched by Leo's reaction. "Music finds a way," he said simply. "It always finds a way to reach people, no matter what barriers might seem to be in the way." He played a few more notes, watching as Leo closed his eyes to better concentrate on the sensations. Then he put the guitar aside and reached for a small bag that had been sitting on the table. "I have something for you, Leo," he said. "A little, in token to remember this evening by." He pulled out a black cowboy hat, smaller than his own, but otherwise identical, with a silver band around the crown. Leo's eyes widened as George held it out to him. "Every true country music fan needs a proper hat," George said with a wink, "especially one who feels the music as deeply as you do." Leo took the hat with reverent hands, his fingers tracing the silver band before he carefully placed it on his head. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made just for him. "What do you say?" Elena prompted, signing to Leo. "Thank you," Leo signed, his movements slow and deliberate, his eyes never leaving George Strait's face. "This is the best day of my life." When Elena translated, George Strait nodded, his expression warm. "Mine too, young man. Mine too." Jamie, who had been standing quietly by the door, stepped forward. "I hate to break this up, but George has a few more people to meet before he can call it a night." George nodded but didn't rush to end their conversation. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, handing it to Elena. "This has my manager's contact information," he explained. "I'd like to invite you and Leo to another concert sometime, as my personal guests. Maybe we could arrange for Leo to feel the music from an even better position, right next to the stage." Eleanor took the card with trembling fingers, overwhelmed by the generosity of the offer. "That's incredibly kind of you," she said. "I don't know what to say." George Strait smiled. "Just say you'll come. Music is meant to be shared, and I'd be honored to share mine with Leo again." As Elena translated this final offer for Leo, she noticed someone hovering in the doorway behind Jamie. It was Frank, the staff member who had been so dismissive earlier. His expression was a mixture of shame and embarrassment as he watched the interaction between Leo and George Strait. George noticed him too. "Frank," he said, his voice neutral but firm. "Come in for a moment, would you?" Frank entered the room hesitantly, his eyes downcast. "Yes, sir?" "I believe you've met Leo and his mother earlier this evening," George said, his tone measured. Frank nodded uncomfortably. "Yes, sir, I did." George laid a hand on Leo's shoulder. "Leo here is teaching me a lot about how music works beyond what our ears can tell us. It's a good reminder that we should never make assumptions about what someone can or can't experience." Frank's face flushed red. "Yes, sir, I understand." "Good," George said simply. "Because music is for everyone, Frank. Everyone. And my concerts are places where all fans are welcome. Is that clear?" "Very clear, sir," Frank said, his voice subdued. "I apologize for any misunderstanding." George nodded once, accepting the apology without elaborating further. It was clear to everyone in the room that Frank had been reprimanded, but in a way that preserved his dignity while making the point unmistakable. With that matter addressed, George turned back to Leo and Eleanor. "It was truly a pleasure meeting you both," he said, shaking Elena's hand again and giving Leo's shoulder a gentle squeeze. "I hope to see you at another show soon." As Jamie led them back through the maze of hallways toward the theater exit, Leo walked as if in a dream, one hand constantly reaching up to touch the cowboy hat on his head, as if to reassure himself that it was real, that this whole evening had been real. Outside the theater, the night air was cool and refreshing after the warmth of the crowded venue. Other concert-goers were dispersing slowly, many still discussing the show with animated expressions and excited voices. A few people recognized Leo with his new cowboy hat and smiled or waved, having witnessed his special moment during the concert. Elena crouched down to Leo's level, signing, "How do you feel?" Leo's hands moved slowly, deliberately, as if he was carefully choosing each word. "Like I'm floating," he signed, "like my heart might burst, like I want to keep this feeling forever." Eleanor smiled, her own heart full to overflowing. "You will," she signed back. "Memories like this last a lifetime." As they walked to their car, Leo's step had a new bounce, a new confidence. He was no longer just a boy who experienced the world differently. He was a boy who had been seen, acknowledged, and celebrated for that difference by none other than George Strait himself. Elena watched her son, marveling at how a single evening could transform him so completely. The pain of Frank's earlier dismissal had been washed away by the tide of George Strait's kindness and understanding. In its place was a new sense of validation and belonging, a confirmation that Leo's passion for music was not just real, but worthy of respect. As they drove home under a sky full of stars, with Leo's new cowboy hat carefully placed on his lap, Elena thought about all the barriers they had faced and would likely continue to face. But tonight had shown that some barriers could be broken, that some divisions could be bridged by something as universal as music and the simple kindness of understanding. Leo fell asleep in the car, his face peaceful, his hands still clutching the hat George Strait had given him. Elena glanced at him as she drove, her heart swelling with love and gratitude. Tonight had been magical, a perfect moment in time that neither of them would ever forget. What she didn't know then, couldn't have known, was that this night was just the beginning. The simple act of a famous musician acknowledging a deaf boy's love of music was about to ripple outward in ways that would transform not just Leo's life, but the lives of countless others. The real miracle was still to come. The video appeared online 3 days after the concert. Someone in the audience had captured the moment when George Strait acknowledged Leo and dedicated a song to him. Within hours, it had thousands of views. By the end of the week, it had gone viral, with millions of people around the world watching the king of country music celebrate a deaf boy's love of music. Elena first learned about the video when her phone began buzzing non-stop with notifications. Friends, family, and even people she barely knew were sending her links and messages of amazement. When she finally watched it herself, sitting at the kitchen table with her morning coffee, tears streamed down her face. The footage captured not just George Strait's words, but also cut to shots of Leo in the audience, his face transformed with wonder as his mother signed the singer's message to him. Leo was still asleep, his new cowboy hat perched carefully on the bedpost where he could see it first thing upon waking. Elena debated whether to wake him and show him the video, but decided to let him sleep. There would be time enough for him to see how his special moment was touching hearts around the world. By the time Leo padded into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from his eyes, Elena had received calls from 2 local news stations requesting interviews. She had politely declined both, protective of Leo's privacy and unsure how he would feel about the sudden attention. "Good morning, sleepyhead," she signed as Leo climbed onto a kitchen chair, immediately reaching for the cowboy hat he had carried home from the concert. "Was it real?" he signed, his eyes serious as he placed the hat reverently on his head. "Did I really meet George Strait last night?" Elena smiled. "It was very real," she assured him. "And guess what? Someone filmed it, and now lots of people are watching it online. They're touched by how George Strait played a special song just for you." Leo's eyes widened, a mix of emotions crossing his face: surprise, happiness, and a touch of uncertainty. "Can I see it?" he signed. Elena nodded and pulled up the video on her tablet, setting it in front of Leo. He watched with rapt attention, his eyes growing moist as he saw himself on the screen, saw George Strait speaking about him with such warmth and respect. When the video ended, Leo sat silently for a moment, processing. "People are watching this," he signed finally. "What are they saying?" Elena hesitated, then showed him some of the comments people had left beneath the video. "Deaf boy experiences music through vibrations," one read. "George Strait shows what a true class act looks like," said another. "This made me cry," was a comment repeated dozens of times. Leo read them slowly, his brow furrowing in concentration. "Why does this make people so emotional?" he signed, genuinely puzzled. Elena considered her answer carefully. "I think," she signed, "because it reminds people that music is more than just sound. It's feeling, it's connection, and seeing you experience it in your own way, and seeing George Strait honor that, reminds them of what music is really about." Leo nodded thoughtfully, seeming to accept this explanation. He was quiet as he ate his breakfast, occasionally glancing at Elena's phone as it continued to buzz with notifications. It was mid-morning when the call came from Strait's management. "Team," Elena answered cautiously, unsure what to expect. "Ms. Martinez? This is Sarah Klein from GL Management," the woman on the other end said. "I work with Strait. I'm calling about your son, Leo." Elena's heart skipped a beat. "Yes? First, George wanted me to make sure you both got home safely, and to say again what a pleasure it was to meet you both," Sarah continued. "But there's another reason for my call. That video from the concert has gone viral, and we've been inundated with media requests. Before we respond to any of them, George wanted to check with you and make sure you're comfortable with the attention." Elena sank into a chair, overwhelmed. I don't know," she admitted. "I've already turned down some local reporters. I want to protect Leo, but at the same time," she trailed off, uncertain how to express her conflicted feelings. "I understand completely," Sarah assured her. "No one expects you to do anything you're not comfortable with. But George had an idea he wanted me to run by you. He's scheduled to appear on the morning show next week to promote his upcoming album. He thought if you and Leo were willing, it might be nice for Leo to join him for that interview. It would be a controlled environment with questions approved in advance, and George would be right there with him." Elena's mind raced. The morning show was one of the biggest national television programs in the country. The thought of Leo appearing on it was both thrilling and terrifying. "Can I think about it?" she asked. "I need to discuss it with Leo." "Of course," Sarah replied. "Take your time. George just wants whatever makes you and Leo most comfortable. He was really touched by meeting Leo, and he thinks there's a powerful message here about how music connects us all. But he also understands if you'd prefer to keep your privacy." After hanging up, Elena sat still for several minutes, trying to process everything. The world had suddenly expanded around them, offering opportunities she had never imagined. But with those opportunities came risks and pressures she wasn't sure Leo was ready for. When she finally explained the call to Leo, his reaction surprised her. Instead of the excitement she had expected, he seemed thoughtful, almost solemn. "Would I have to talk?" he signed, his movements hesitant. "In front of everyone?" "You would. Sign and I would translate," Elena explained. "And only if you wanted to. You don't have to do this at all, Leo. It's completely your choice." Leo was quiet for a long time, his fingers fidgeting with the brim of his cowboy hat. "I want to think about it," he finally signed. Throughout the day, Leo was unusually quiet, spending long periods in his room with his Strait posters and CDs. Elena checked on him occasionally, finding him either deep in thought or with his hands pressed against his old CAD player, feeling the vibrations of the music with an intensity that seemed new. By evening, Leo had made his decision. He approached Elena in the kitchen where she was preparing dinner, his expression resolute. "I want to do the interview," he signed. "If it will help other deaf kids who love music, I want to do it." Elena was taken aback by the maturity of his reasoning. "Are you sure? It's a big stage, lots of people watching." Leo nodded firmly. "Strait wasn't afraid to talk about me in front of a whole theater. I shouldn't be afraid either." Elena's eyes filled with tears as she pulled her son into a hug. In that moment, she recognized that something fundamental had shifted in Leo. The acknowledgement from his hero hadn't just made him happy. It had given him a new kind of confidence, a belief in the value of his unique perspective. She called Sarah back that evening and accepted the invitation. What followed was a whirlwind of preparations. Sarah arranged for them to fly to New York City, where the morning show was filmed. Everything was taken care of: flights, hotel, transportation, even a shopping trip for Leo to pick out a special outfit for the television appearance. The night before they left for New York, Elena sat on the edge of Leo's bed, helping him pack his backpack with essentials for the plane ride. Leo was carefully wrapping his cowboy hat in tissue paper to protect it during the journey. "Are you nervous?" Elena signed, watching his meticulous movements. Leo paused, considering the question. "Seriously?" "A little," he admitted, "but mostly excited. Do you think other deaf kids will see me on TV?" "I think they will," Eleanor signed, "and I think you'll make them very proud." Leo smiled, his eyes bright with purpose. "Then it's worth being a little nervous." The flight to New York the next day was Leo's first time on an airplane. Though he couldn't hear the roar of the engines or the announcements over the intercom, he was fascinated by the vibrations of takeoff and landing, placing his hands flat against the window to feel the powerful engines propelling them through the sky. New York City was a sensory overload even for Elena, who could filter out the cacophony of sounds. For Leo, the visual stimulation was intense. The towering buildings, the constant movement of people and vehicles, the flashing lights, and giant screens. He took it all in with wide eyes, his head swiveling constantly as their taxi navigated the busy streets to their hotel. Their room was on a high floor with a view of Central Park, a luxury that made Elena slightly uncomfortable until she remembered that George Strait's management was covering all expenses. Sarah Klein met them in the hotel lobby, a tall woman with a kind smile and efficient manner. She explained the schedule for the next day: hair and makeup early in the morning, then the live interview, followed by a private lunch with George Strait, who would be arriving in the city later that night. "George is really looking forward to seeing Leo again," Sarah told Elena as they rode the elevator up to their room. "He's been telling everyone about the amazing young fan who feels his music through vibrations." When Elena translated this for Leo, his face lit up with pride. The night before the interview, Leo had trouble falling asleep, too excited by the day ahead and the unfamiliar surroundings. Elena sat with him, signing the lyrics to his favorite George Strait songs, like a lullaby, until his eyelids finally grew heavy. Watching her son drift off to sleep, Elena marveled at how quickly their lives had changed. Just over a week ago, they had been a mother and son from a small town, dealing with the everyday challenges of Leo's deafness, living quiet, lives punctuated by their private rituals of shared music. Now they were in New York City, about to appear on national television with George Strait. It felt like a dream, but the solid reality of Leo's cowboy hat, carefully placed on the hotel dresser, reminded her that it was all wonderfully, improbably real. Morning came too quickly. A production assistant arrived at their hotel room at 6 a.m. to escort them to the studio. Leo was groggy, but quickly perked up when Elena reminded him of what day it was. He insisted on wearing his cowboy hat, which now seemed less like a souvenir and more like a talisman, giving him courage for what lay ahead. At the studio, they were ushered into a dressing room where a makeup artist gently applied powder to Leo's face to prevent shine under the bright lights. Leo sat perfectly still, his eyes serious, taking in every detail of this new world of television. Elena was given a brief touch-up as well, and then they were led to a waiting area just off stage. Through a monitor, they could see the hosts of the morning show discussing the day's headlines. Leo couldn't hear what they were saying, but he watched their expressions and body language intently. And then George Strait was there, striding into the waiting area with the same warm smile they remembered from the concert. He was dressed in his signature style, jeans, a button-up shirt, and a cowboy hat that matched the one Leo was wearing. He crouched down to Leo's level immediately. "Well, look at you, partner," he said, his eyes crinkling with genuine pleasure. "That hat looks mighty fine on you." Elena translated and Leo beamed, signing back, "I've been taking very good care of it. I only wear it for special occasions." George laughed when Elena translated. "This definitely qualifies as a special occasion." He turned to Elena. How are you holding up? This must all be a bit overwhelming. Elena nodded, touched by his consideration. It's been a whirlwind, but Leo's handling it better than I am, I think. George smiled. Kids are resilient, Wait, but listen, when we get out there, just relax and be yourselves. I'll take the lead if things get awkward, but I don't think they will. The hosts are good people, and they're genuinely interested in Leo's story. A producer appeared, clipboard in hand. We're ready for you, Mr. Strait. We'll bring Leo and his mother out after your introduction. George nodded and gave Leo a conspiratorial wink before following the producer. Elena and Leo watched on the monitor as George walked onto the set, greeted warmly by the hosts, a man and woman seated on a couch across from a comfortable-looking armchair. Our next guest is a country music legend with over 60 number one hits to his name, the female host was saying. But today, he's here not just to talk about his new album, but about a very special moment at a recent concert that has touched millions of people online. Please welcome George Strait. The audience applauded as George settled into the armchair. After some brief pleasantries and questions about his new album, the male host shifted the topic. George, there's a video going around that shows a really touching moment from one of your recent concerts, he said. Can you tell us about that? George nodded, his expression growing thoughtful. Well, I was doing a smaller venue show in Riverdale, and my team let me know that there was a special young fan in the audience, a 10-year-old boy named Leo, who is profoundly deaf. The hosts and audience made sounds of interest and surprise that Leo couldn't hear, but that Elena registered with a flutter of nerves. What struck me, George continued, was hearing how this young man experiences music. He can't hear it in the traditional sense, but he feels the vibrations. He knows my songs by heart, the rhythms, the feelings they convey. His mother translates the lyrics into sign language for him. It just reminded me that music is universal. It's not just about what we hear, it's about what we feel. That's beautiful, the female host said. And I understand that Leo is here with us today. George smiled. He is, and I'd love for you to meet him. That was their cue. A production assistant gestured to Elena and Leo, and they walked onto the set. Leo moved with careful dignity, his cowboy hat slightly too big for his small head, but worn with unmistakable pride. Elena walked beside him, her hand lightly on his shoulder for reassurance. The audience broke into applause as they appeared. Leo couldn't hear it, but he could see the people clapping, their faces warm with welcome. George Strait stood and guided them to a small sofa that had been placed next to his armchair. Leo sat between George and Eleanor, looking small but determined. "Welcome, Leo and Eleanor," the female host said, her expression friendly. "It's so wonderful to have you here." Elena translated for Leo, who nodded politely, his hands folded in his lap. "Leo, can you tell us a little bit about how you experience music?" the male host asked, his tone gentle. Elena translated the question, and Leo's hands began to move, forming signs with confidence that grew as he continued. Elena translated aloud for the audience. "I feel it in different ways," Leo's signs expressed. "Sometimes I put my hands on speakers or on the floor at concerts. I can feel the vibrations. They're like patterns that tell a story. Different instruments make different feelings. Drums are strong and clear. Guitars have a special vibration that I really like, especially country guitars." The hosts listened with rapt attention, as did the audience. There was something powerful about watching Leo's expressive hands and face as he signed, with Eleanor's voice providing the translation. "And what is it about George Strait's music specifically that you love?" the female host asked. Leo's face lit up at this question. His signs became more animated as he explained through Eleanor. "His songs have a special rhythm, a special feeling. I can tell his songs apart from other country songs just by the vibrations. And the way he sings, Even though I can't hear his voice, I can feel when he holds notes longer or when he changes the power in his voice. My mother tells me the stories in his songs, and I can feel those stories in the music. George Strait was watching Leo with undisguised admiration. "You know," he interjected, "I've been making music for over 40 years, and I don't think anyone has ever described my songs so beautifully." Leo blushed at this praise, but his expression remained earnest. At the concert, the male host continued, "George dedicated a song specially to you. What was that moment like?" Leo's hands moved more slowly now, choosing his signs with care. "It was like a dream," Elena translated. "I couldn't believe George Strait was talking about me, that he knew I was there. When he played that song for me, the vibrations felt different, stronger, more special. I felt like I was floating." "And afterward," the female host prompted, "you got to meet George backstage?" Leo nodded enthusiastically, his face brightening. "At the memory. He let me feel the vibrations directly from his guitar," Elena translated, as Leo signed. "It was amazing, clearer than anything I had felt before. And he gave me this hat." Leo touched the brim of his cowboy hat reverently. The audience made a collective sound of appreciation that Elena could hear, but Leo could only see in their expressions. "Oh, George," the male host said, turning to the country star, "what made you decide to acknowledge Leo during your concert and then meet with him afterward?" George Strait adjusted his hat slightly, a gesture that Leo immediately mimicked, bringing smiles to the faces of both hosts. "Well, when my team told me about Leo, it just struck me as something special," George explained. "Here's this young man who, by all conventional thinking, shouldn't be able to enjoy music the way the rest of us do. But he found a way. He connected with my songs on a level that most hearing people never achieve. That kind of passion, that kind of determination to experience something beautiful despite obstacles, that deserves to be acknowledged." He turned to look directly at Leo. "Plus, I've rarely met a more genuine fan. Leo knows my catalogue better than some of my road crew." This brought laughter from the audience and a proud smile from Leo when Elena translated. "What has the response been like to the video of that moment?" the female host asked. George nodded thoughtfully. "Overwhelming, in the best way. I've gotten thousands of messages from people who were moved by Leo's story, including, interestingly enough, quite a few from the deaf community who have similar experiences with music but have never seen it acknowledged so publicly." The male host turned to Elena. "And for you, as Leo's mother, what has this experience been like?" Elena took a deep breath, suddenly finding herself in the spotlight. "It's been incredible," she said, her voice slightly shaky with emotion. "As a parent of a child with a disability, you spend so much time fighting for inclusion, for understanding. To have someone like George not just include Leo, but celebrate him for exactly who he is, it's more than I could have ever hoped for." Leo was watching his mother intently, reading her lips and expression. He reached over and took her hand, a gesture of support that brought tears to Elena's eyes. "You've raised an extraordinary young man," George said to Elena, his voice warm, with sincerity. "Leo," the female host said, "do you have a message for other deaf children who might be watching today?" Elena translated, and Leo's expression grew serious. His hands moved with deliberate precision as he signed his response. "Don't let anyone tell you what you can't do or can't feel," Elena translated. "If you love music, find your own way to experience it. It belongs to everyone, not just to people who can hear." And there was a beat of silence as this powerful statement settled over the studio, followed by enthusiastic applause from the audience. Leo couldn't hear it, but he could see it, and the smile that spread across his face was radiant. As the segment drew to a close, the hosts thanked George, Leo, and Elena for sharing their story. The female host made a final comment that seemed to resonate with everyone in the studio. "Sometimes the most beautiful music," she said, "is the kind we feel rather than hear." As they walked off the set, Leo between George and Elena, there was a sense of something momentous having occurred. What had begun as a simple concert experience had transformed into a platform for a message about inclusion, about the universal language of music, and about the determination of one small boy to experience beauty in his own unique way. Backstage, as production assistants buzzed around them and the show continued on the set, George crouched down to Leo's level once more. "Thank you, partner," he said, his expression serious. "You taught me something important about my own music, today." When Elena translated, Leo looked puzzled. "What did I teach you?" he signed. George smiled. "That the heart hears what the ears cannot. And that's a lesson I won't soon forget." As they left the studio that day, neither Leo nor Elena could have imagined how those few minutes on national television would continue to ripple outward, touching lives far beyond their small town and changing perceptions in ways they never could have predicted. The true impact of Leo's story was only beginning to unfold. The return to Riverdale after their New York adventure felt like stepping into a different world. The small town looked exactly the same. The familiar main street with its modest shops, the park where Leo had played as a toddler, their cozy house with its slightly overgrown lawn. But Leo and Elena had changed. They carried with them not just memories of bright lights and national television, but a new sense of purpose that had crystallized during those extraordinary days. Word of their appearance on the morning show had spread quickly through Riverdale. Neighbors stopped Elena at the grocery store to tell her they'd seen the interview. Leo's teachers showed the clip to his classmates, many of whom now looked at him with new eyes, not as the deaf boy who needed special accommodations, but as the boy who had appeared on television with George Strait, who had a unique gift for experiencing music. 2 weeks after their return, Elena received an email that made her hands tremble. It was from the president of the National Association for the Deaf, praising Leo's appearance on the morning show and asking if he would be interested in becoming involved with a new initiative they were launching. A program to make music more accessible to deaf and hard-of-hearing children. "They want you to help design the program," Elena signed to Leo after dinner, watching his face carefully for his reaction. "They think your experience could help other children connect with music." Leo sat very still, processing this information. Then his hands began to move, tentatively at first, then with growing excitement. "I could show them how I feel the vibrations, how I learn the songs." Eleanor nodded. "Exactly. You would be a consultant. They would fly us to Washington, D.C. for meetings, and you would share your ideas." Leo's eyes widened at the mention of another trip. Another big city. "Would I miss school?" Eleanor smiled at his conscientiousness. "Just a few days. Your teachers already said they'd help you catch up." Leo thought for another moment, then signed resolutely. "I want to do it. I want to help other kids like me." The next morning, as Elena was preparing breakfast, the phone rang. It was Sarah Klein from George Strait's management team again. Elena answered with a mixture of curiosity and slight trepidation, wondering what new surprise might be in store. "Elena, good morning," Sarah said, her voice warm with familiarity. "I hope you and Leo are settling back into normal life after all the excitement." Elena laughed. "Trying to, though normal seems to have a new definition these days." "I can imagine," Sarah said. "Listen, the reason I'm calling, George has been thinking about Leo's story and the response it's received. He has an idea he wanted me to run by you." Elena braced herself. "What kind of idea?" "He's planning his next tour," Sarah explained, "and he wants to include a segment in each show highlighting how music reaches beyond traditional hearing. He'd like to incorporate some visual elements that show how music can be felt through vibrations, seen through light displays, experienced in multiple sensory ways, essentially making his concerts more accessible to fans like Leo. Elena sat down, stunned by the scope of what Sarah was describing. "That sounds incredible." "It gets better," Sarah continued. "George would like Leo to consult on this project, to share his expertise on how he experiences music, and if you're comfortable with it, he'd like to feature Leo's story in the promotional materials for the tour." I don't know what to say," Elena stammered. "The National Association for the Deaf and now George Strait, both wanting Leo's input, both seeing value in his unique perspective." It was beyond anything she could have imagined. "You don't need to decide right away," Sarah assured her. "Talk it over with Leo, but George feels strongly about this. Your son opened his eyes to a whole community of fans he hadn't fully considered before, and he wants to make sure his music reaches everyone it can." After hanging up, Elena leaned against the kitchen counter, overwhelmed by the possibilities unfolding before them. Leo wandered in, still in his pajamas, his hair tousled from sleep. When she shared Sarah's call with him, his reaction was instantaneous and enthusiastic. "Yes," he signed, his hands practically bouncing with excitement. "I want to help George Strait. When do we start?" Eleanor laughed, infected by his enthusiasm. "Slow down, we need to work out the details first. But I'll let Sarah know you're interested." Over the following months, Leo's life transformed in ways that Elena could never have predicted. The quiet boy who had once been defined primarily by what he couldn't do was now being celebrated for his unique perspective. He became a consultant, not just for George Strait's tour, but for the National Association for the Deaf's Music Accessibility Program. His story began appearing in educational materials about inclusive approaches to music education. In October, 6 months after that fateful concert, George Strait's new tour was announced, with a special emphasis on multisensory music experiences. Promotional videos featured Leo, explaining how he felt music through vibrations, with George Strait adding that his upcoming shows would include special areas where deaf and hard-of-hearing fans could experience the concerts through enhanced vibration platforms. Visual light displays synchronized with the music and other innovative approaches. Tickets for the tour sold out within hours. What no one had anticipated was how many hearing people were also intrigued by the opportunity to experience music in new ways. The concept resonated far beyond the deaf community, touching something universal about the human desire to connect deeply with art. Leo and Elena were invited to attend the tour's opening night in Dallas as special guests. As they were escorted to their seats, in a special section equipped with the new vibration technology, Elena noticed something that brought tears to her eyes. Throughout the arena, she could see people wearing T-shirts with a simple but powerful slogan, "Music is for everyone." Before the show began, George Strait himself came to their section to greet them. He crouched down to Leo's level, as he had done at their first meeting. "What do you think of all this?" he asked, gesturing around at the specialized seating area, which was filled with deaf and hard-of-hearing fans of all ages. "Did we get it right?" Elena translated, and Leo looked around thoughtfully before signing his response. "It's amazing," Elena translated as Leo's hands moved expressively. "So many people like me, all here to feel the music. I never thought I'd see this." George nodded, his eyes crinkling with emotion. "I never thought I'd see it either, partner. And it's all because of you. You showed me something I'd been missing all these years." As the arena lights dimmed and the crowd's energy surged, Elena watched Leo place his hands on the special vibration panels built into their seating area. His face transformed with wonder as he felt the opening notes of the first song pulse through his fingers. Around them, dozens of other deaf and hard-of-hearing fans were having the same experience, their expressions ranging from surprise to delight to tears of joy. The concert was transcendent. George Strait performed with an energy that seemed fueled by the knowledge that his music was reaching people in ways it never had before. Large screens displayed real-time visualizations of the sound waves, creating a visual feast that complemented the auditory experience for hearing audience members and provided a rich sensory experience for deaf attendees. Dancers interpreted certain songs through sign language that was both technically accurate and artistically expressive. Halfway through the show, George Strait paused between songs to address the audience. "I've been performing for over 40 years, he said, his voice resonant with emotion. But it wasn't until recently that I truly understood the power of music to reach beyond what we hear with our ears." He gestured toward the section where Leo and the other deaf attendees were seated. "6 months ago, I met a young man named Leo who taught me that music is felt as much as it's heard. He experiences my songs through vibrations, through the stories they tell, through the emotions they convey. And that made me realize that maybe I've been thinking too narrowly about who my music is for." The spotlight found Leo in the crowd, and his face appeared on the giant screens around the arena. There was a moment of surprise in his expression, followed by a shy smile as he realized he was being acknowledged. The crowd erupted in applause that Leo couldn't hear but could certainly feel through the vibration panels. "This tour," George continued, "is dedicated to breaking down barriers, to making sure that music truly is for everyone. Because if a 10-year-old deaf boy can find joy in country music, then we as artists and as an industry need to make sure we're not putting up unnecessary obstacles to that joy." The crowd's response was thunderous. Elena, translating George's words for Leo, felt tears streaming down her face. Beside her, Leo was beaming, his hands pressed firmly against the vibration panels as if he could absorb every ounce of the moment's energy. After the concert backstage, there was a reception for the deaf and hard-of-hearing attendees who had experienced the show in the special section. George Strait mingled among them, taking time to speak with each person, learning about their experiences with music. Elena watched Leo move confidently through the crowd, signing with other deaf attendees, demonstrating to younger children how to position their hands to best feel the vibrations. He had become not just a consultant, but a leader, showing others the path he had forged. A tall man in a tailored suit approached Elena as she watched Leo from across the room. "Ms. Martinez," he said, extending his hand, "I'm Daniel Foster from the Grammy Foundation. I was hoping to have a word with you about Leo." Elena shook his hand, curious. "Of course. We've been following Leo's story since the morning show appearance," Daniel explained. "The foundation has a program called Grammy in the schools that brings music education to underserved communities. We'd like to develop a new branch specifically focused on accessible music education for deaf and hard-of-hearing students, and we would be honored if Leo would serve as an advisor." Elena stared at him, momentarily speechless. "The Grammy Foundation wants Leo as an advisor?" Daniel nodded, smiling at her surprise. "His perspective is invaluable. He's shown that with the right approaches, music can be accessible to everyone. We'd like to formalize some of the techniques he's developed and create curriculum materials that could be used in schools nationwide." Across the room, Leo was demonstrating to a small deaf girl how to feel the different vibrations created by various instruments. The child's face was transformed with wonder as Leo guided her hands to a small vibration pad that had been used during the concert to isolate the sensation of drum beats. "He's a natural teacher," Daniel observed, "and he has a unique ability to bridge worlds, to help hearing people understand the deaf experience, and to help deaf people connect with music in new ways." Elena watched her son with pride that threatened to overwhelm her. "I think he would be very interested," she said. "He's discovered a purpose that means a lot to him." As they drove back to their hotel after the reception, Leo was unusually quiet, his expression thoughtful. Elena glanced at him, wondering what was going through his mind after such an eventful evening. "Everything okay?" She signed when they stopped at a red light. Leo nodded slowly. "I was just thinking," he signed, "about that night at the concert when the man was mean to us. When he said I didn't belong there." Elena felt a twist in her stomach at the memory of Frank's dismissive attitude. What about it? "If that hadn't happened," Leo signed, his movements deliberate, "George Strait might not have noticed us. Jamie might not have told him about me. None of this might have happened." Elena considered this. It was true. The entire chain of events had been set in motion by that unpleasant encounter. "Sometimes good things come from difficult moments," she signed. Leo nodded. "I'm not angry at that man anymore," he signed. "I hope he knows that because of him, many deaf people can now enjoy music better." Elena was struck by her son's capacity for forgiveness, for finding meaning in adversity. At just 10 years old, he had a wisdom that many adults never achieved. Back at the hotel, as Elena was helping Leo prepare for bed, there was a knock at their door. She opened it to find a hotel staff member holding a large envelope. "Delivery for Leo Martinez," the woman said pleasantly. Elena thanked her and brought the envelope to Leo, who was sitting on the edge of the bed in his pajamas. "It's for you," she signed. Leo opened the envelope curiously. Inside was a letter on George Strait's personal stationery, accompanied by a photograph taken backstage after the concert, showing George and Leo standing side by side in their matching cowboy hats. Elena translated the letter as Leo read along. "Dear Leo, tonight was special in ways I can't fully express. Seeing all those faces light up as they experienced music in a new way, that's something I'll carry with me for the rest of my career. And it all started with you. I wanted you to have this photo as a reminder of how one person can make a difference. You changed how I think about music, and now you're changing how the world thinks about it too. Your friend always, George Strait." Leo stared at the letter for a long time, running his fingers over the signature as if to confirm its reality. Then he carefully placed the letter and photo on the bedside table, positioning them so they would be the first things he saw upon waking. As Eleanor tucked him in, Leo signed one more thing before closing his eyes. "I never thought being deaf would be my special power, but it is. It helped me show people something important." Eleanor kissed his forehead too, moved to respond immediately. As she turned off the light, leaving just enough illumination for Leo to see if he woke during the night, she thought about how profoundly their lives had changed in the span of 6 months. Leo had gone from being defined by what he couldn't do to being celebrated for his unique perspective. He had found his voice, not through speech, but through his passionate advocacy for accessible music, and in doing so, he had changed not just his own life, but the lives of countless others. The next morning, as they prepared to fly home to Riverdale, Elena's phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from Sarah Klein with a link to a news article. The headline read, "Record Industry Announces New Accessibility Initiative Following George Strait Tour Innovation." Elena showed it to Leo, translating the key points. Major record labels and concert venues were committing to implementing the same technology George Strait had pioneered, making music accessible to deaf and hard-of-hearing fans across all genres. The article specifically mentioned the Leo Martinez effect, crediting the young boy's story with sparking a movement within the industry. Leo read the article with wide eyes, then looked up at Elena, his expression a mix of disbelief and pride. "Is this real?" he signed. "Are they really calling it that?" Elena nodded, her heart swelling with emotion. It's real. You've started something important, Leo. Something that will help so many people. As they boarded their flight home, Leo clutched his backpack, which now contained George Strait's letter and photo, carefully protected in a folder. He gazed out the window as the plane took off, watching Dallas grow smaller beneath them. Elena wondered what he was thinking, what he was feeling as they returned to their small town, carrying the knowledge of the impact they had made. What she couldn't know was that Leo was already thinking beyond the Grammy Foundation advisory role, beyond the National Association for the Deaf Initiative. As he watched the clouds outside the airplane window, he was imagining new possibilities, music summer camps for deaf children, technology that could translate music into tactile sensations even more precisely, ways to help deaf musicians express themselves. The groundwork had been laid for something much bigger than either Leo or Eleanor could have imagined that night at the concert 6 months ago. What had begun as a simple wish to experience George Strait's music had blossomed into a movement that was reshaping the landscape of music accessibility, and it had all started with a boy who refused to believe that music wasn't for him. Back in Riverdale, life took on a new rhythm. Leo's schedule now included regular video conferences with the Grammy Foundation, consultations with George Strait's tour production team, and speaking engagements at schools and community centers, where he shared his story and demonstrated his techniques for experiencing music through vibration. Elena had reduced her hours at the local clinic where she worked as a nurse to accommodate this new reality, a change made possible by the consulting fees Leo was now earning, fees that Elena was carefully setting aside in a college fund, ensuring that Leo's unexpected celebrity would translate into future opportunities. 3 months after the Dallas concert, as autumn painted Riverdale in shades of gold and crimson, Eleanor received another unexpected call. It was from Frank, the staff member who had been so dismissive of Leo at the original concert. "Miss Martinez," he said, his voice hesitant when Elena answered. "You probably don't remember me, but—" "I remember you, Frank," Elena said, her tone neutral despite the flicker of old anger she felt. There was a pause. "I've been wanting to call for a while," Frank continued, "to apologize. What I said that night, it was ignorant and cruel. I've seen all the news about Leo, about what George Strait is doing with his tour. I've been following it and, well, it's made me think a lot about my own prejudices." Eleanor sat down at the kitchen table, surprised by the direction of the conversation. "Thank you for saying that, Frank. It means a lot. I'm actually calling for another reason too," Frank said. "I'm not with the event staff anymore. After that night, I did some soul-searching and decided to make a change. I'm working with a community arts program now, and we're trying to make our programs more accessible. I wondered if Leo might be willing to speak to our team, share his perspective." Elena felt a complex mixture of emotions, lingering hurt from that first encounter, but also appreciation for Frank's evident growth and his courage in reaching out. "I'll talk to Leo about it," she said finally. "He's pretty busy these days, but this might be something he'd want to do." After hanging up, Elena leaned back in her chair, marveling at how far the ripples had spread from that one moment of cruelty turned to celebration. Frank, who had once dismissed Leo's presence at a concert, was now working to make arts accessible to all. It was a transformation she couldn't have predicted, another unexpected miracle in a year that had been full of them. When Leo came home from school that afternoon, Elena shared Frank's call with him. Leo's response, as it had been when he discussed Frank after the Dallas concert, showed a maturity beyond his years. "I want to help," he signed decisively. "If he's trying to do better, I want to help him." Elena hugged her son, overwhelmed by his capacity for forgiveness, his eagerness to convert past pain into future progress. In that moment, she knew with certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, Leo would face them with the same determined spirit that had carried him this far. As the year drew to a close, Leo received an invitation that left even Elena speechless. It was from the Kennedy Center Honors, requesting Leo's participation in a tribute to George Strait, who was among that year's honorees. Leo would be part of a special performance celebrating George Strait's contributions to making music accessible to all. "They want me to be on stage." Leo signed after Elena translated the invitation, his expression a mix of excitement and trepidation. "What would I do?" "They want you to share your story," Elena explained, "to demonstrate how you experience music. It would be part of honoring George Strait's work." Leo considered this solemnly, then nodded. "I'll do it. For George." The Kennedy Center Honors was traditionally held in December, which gave them several months to prepare. Leo worked with a choreographer who helped him develop a performance piece that would visually represent how he experienced music through vibration. He practiced diligently, determined to honor George Strait in a way that would be meaningful. As the date approached, Leo's excitement grew, but so did his nervousness. This would be the largest stage he had ever been on, the most prestigious audience he had ever addressed. Elena reassured him constantly, reminding him that his authenticity was what made his story powerful. "Just be yourself," she signed, the night before they left for Washington. "That's all you need to be." The Kennedy Center was magnificent, its grand architecture and rich history creating an atmosphere of solemnity and celebration. Leo, dressed in a small tuxedo with his trusty cowboy hat, now a signature part of his public appearances, took in the surroundings with wide eyes. The ceremony was attended by cultural luminaries, political figures, and celebrities, all gathered to honor the year's recipients. George Strait was seated in the front row of a box alongside the other honorees and various dignitaries. When it came time for George Strait's tribute, several country music stars performed his most famous songs. Then, to introduce the final segment, a famous actor stepped forward to the microphone. "Music transcends many barriers," the actor began, "but some barriers seem at first glance insurmountable. How does music reach those who cannot hear it?" George Strait asked that question after meeting a remarkable young fan, and the answer he found has transformed the music industry's approach to accessibility. A spotlight appeared on Leo, who was standing at the side of the stage. Elena, watching from the wings, held her breath as her son walked to center stage with the careful dignity that had become his hallmark. The actor continued, "Please welcome Leo Martinez, the young man whose unique way of experiencing music inspired George Strait to reimagine what music could be and who could enjoy it." As Leo moved to the center of the stage, the lights dimmed. A single spotlight illuminated him as he began his performance, a choreographed piece that demonstrated through movement and gesture how he experienced music through vibration. As he moved, music began to play. George Strait's "I Saw God Today," the song that had been dedicated to Leo at that first concert. The audience watched in rapt silence as this small boy in a cowboy hat expressed through his body what music meant to him. Though he couldn't hear the standing ovation that followed, Leo could see it, and his face shone with pride and accomplishment. George Strait himself stood in his box, applauding with evident emotion. When Leo looked up and saw him, he tipped his cowboy hat in the gesture he had learned from his hero. George Strait returned the gesture, a private moment of connection, amid the public celebration. Later, at the reception following the ceremony, George Strait made his way through the crowd to find Leo and Elena. He crouched down to Leo's level, as he had done at their first meeting, a consistency that Elena found deeply touching. "You stole the show, partner," he said, his eyes crinkling with genuine pride. "Couldn't have asked for a better tribute than..." seeing how my music has reached beyond what I ever imagined." When Elena translated, Leo's hands moved in a simple but profound response. "Thank you for making me feel heard." George Strait's eyes glistened with emotion. "And thank you," he said, "for teaching me how to listen." As they drove back to their hotel that night, Leo unusually quiet beside her, Elena thought about the extraordinary journey they had been on. What had begun as a simple desire to attend a concert had blossomed into a movement that was changing how the world thought about music and accessibility. And at the center of it all was her son, a boy who had never let his inability to hear stop him from experiencing the full richness of life's symphony. Leo's head nodded as he drifted toward sleep, exhausted from the emotions and excitement of the evening. Elena glanced at him, this child who had taught the world that music wasn't just about sound. It was about feeling, about connection, about the vibrations that resonated not just in the ear, but in the heart. The car passed under, a streetlight illuminating Leo's peaceful face for a moment. Elena smiled, thinking of all that lay ahead for her remarkable son. This chapter of their story was ending, but another was just beginning. And if there was one thing she had learned from Leo, it was that life's most beautiful music often came from the most unexpected sources. 5 years passed like the verses of a familiar song, each year building on the themes established in that extraordinary first chapter of Leo's journey. What had begun as a singular moment of connection between a deaf boy and a country music, legend had evolved into a movement that transformed the landscape of music accessibility across the nation and beyond. Leo, now 15, had grown taller, his childish features maturing into those of a young man, though he still wore his cowboy hat. Not the original one given to him by George Strait, which was now carefully preserved in a display case in his bedroom, but a newer version that he had selected himself, maintaining the symbol that had become so much a part of his identity. The Martinez living room wall was covered with framed newspaper articles, photographs, and awards, documenting the ripple effects of Leo's story. The Leo Martinez effect had become a recognized term in the music industry, referring to the wave of accessibility innovations that had followed George Strait's pioneering efforts. On a crisp autumn morning, as Leo was preparing for school, Elena called him into the kitchen, her expression a mix of excitement and something deeper, more emotional. "There's an email you need to see," she signed, turning her laptop toward him. Leo sat down, scanning the message on the screen. It was from Sarah Klein, still George Strait's manager after all these years, though she and Elena had developed their own friendship, independent of their professional connection. "Dear Elena and Leo," the email began, "I hope this finds you both well. I'm writing with some news that George wanted me to share with you personally before it becomes public. After much consideration, he has decided to announce his retirement from touring. His final concert will be held at Madison Square Garden in New York next month, and he would be honored if you both would attend as his special guests. Please call me to discuss the details." Leo looked up at his mother, his expression complex. "George Strait is retiring?" He signed, his movements conveying his surprise and a touch of sadness. Elena nodded. "He's had an amazing career, one of the longest in country music. He's 73 now." Leo considered this, his fingers tapping thoughtfully on the table. "We have to go," he signed decisively. "We have to be there for his last show." The preparations for the trip were filled with nostalgia. As Elena packed their suitcases, she couldn't help but remember that first journey they had taken to New York, how overwhelmed they had been by the city, by the attention, by the sudden expansion of their world. Now New York felt almost familiar, a place they had visited multiple times for various events and appearances. Leo had grown into his role as an advocate with remarkable grace. The shy 10-year-old who had been amazed by George Strait's acknowledgement had become a poised young spokesperson for music accessibility, consulting with major entertainment companies, speaking at educational conferences, and helping design technologies that translated sound into tactile and visual experiences. The cause that had begun with George Strait's tour innovations had spread far beyond country music. Rock concerts, orchestral performances, Broadway shows, all had begun incorporating the techniques and technologies that made music accessible to deaf and hard-of-hearing audiences. What had once been exceptional was now becoming standard, a transformation that filled Elena with pride when she considered her son's role in it. The flight to New York was smooth, Leo sleeping for much of it, conserving his energy for the emotional days ahead. Sarah Klein met them at the airport, greeting them with the warm familiarity of old friends. "George is so looking forward to seeing you both," she told them as they drove into the city. "This final concert means a lot to him, and having you, there feels like completing a circle." The hotel where they were staying was the same one they had stayed in for the morning show appearance 5 years earlier. As they checked in, the manager came forward to greet them personally. "Mr. Martinez, Ms. Martinez, welcome back," he said, shaking their hands. "We're honored to have you with us again." It struck Elena, not for the first time, how her son's name had become recognized, how doors opened for them now in a way that would have seemed impossible before. Leo had become, in his quiet way, a celebrity in his own right, not through seeking fame, but through his genuine passion for making music accessible to all. Their suite was luxurious, with views of Central Park that took Elena's breath away. On the coffee table was a large gift basket with a handwritten note from George Strait. "Leo and Eleanor, looking forward to sharing this final concert with you both. Your friendship has been one of the greatest blessings of my career. See you soon, George." Leo read the note with a solemn expression. "Do you think he would have done all this without meeting us?" He signed to Elena. "All the accessibility. Work?" Elena considered the question carefully. "I don't know," she signed back. "Maybe someone else would have shown him the way if we hadn't. But I do know that meeting you changed something for him. You helped him see music in a new way." The day before the concert, they were invited to attend the final rehearsal at Madison Square Garden. The venue was largely empty, just crew members, and a few select guests scattered throughout the vast space. George Strait was on stage with his band, running through parts of songs, consulting with sound technicians, working out last-minute adjustments to the show. When he spotted Leo and Elena entering, he stopped mid-song and walked to the edge of the stage. "Well, look who's here," he called, smiling broadly. "Come on up, you two." They made their way to the stage, Elena translating George's words for Leo. Despite the years that had passed, George Strait still crouched slightly to be at eye level. With Leo, when they reached him, a gesture of respect that had remained consistent through all their interactions. "And you've grown about a foot since I last saw you," George said, his eyes crinkling with warmth. "But I'd recognize that cowboy hat anywhere." Leo smiled, signing his response. "Yours is still cooler than mine." George laughed when Elena translated. "I don't know about that. Yours has become pretty famous." He led them on a tour of the stage, showing Leo the special vibration platforms that had become standard at his concerts, explaining how they had been refined over the years, based partially on Leo's feedback. The lighting design had also evolved to include more visual, rhythmic elements that corresponded with the music's beat and mood, creating a multi-sensory experience. "You know," George said thoughtfully, as they looked out at the empty arena that would be filled with thousands the next night, "when I started out in this business, I thought music was pretty straightforward. You write songs, you perform them, people listen. What you taught me, Leo, is that music is so much more than what we hear. It's what we feel, what we see, what moves us." When Elena translated, Leo's expression grew serious. "Thank you for listening," he signed. "Not everyone would have." George nodded, understanding the deeper meaning in Leo's words. Sometimes the most important thing we can do is just be open to seeing the world differently than we're used to. That evening, George invited them to a small dinner with his closest friends and family members. It was a gathering of perhaps 20 people in a private room at an upscale restaurant, an intimate celebration before the public farewell the following night. Leo was seated next to George's grandson, a boy about his own age who had grown up hearing stories about Leo with the cowboy hat and was eager to meet him in person. The two boys connected quickly, finding common ground in their shared love of music, though they experienced it in completely different ways. Halfway through the meal, George stood to offer a toast. The room quieted as he raised his glass. "I want to thank all of you for being here tonight," he began. "Each of you represents something special in my life, a relationship that has shaped me and my career in meaningful ways." His gaze moved around the table, acknowledging each person, until it rested on Leo and Elena. "Some of you came into my life recently, and some have been with me since the beginning. But each of you has taught me something important." He turned, slightly to face Leo more directly. "Leo here taught me perhaps the most unexpected lesson of my career. He showed me that my music could reach people I never imagined it could reach, and in ways I never thought possible." Elena translated quickly, watching Leo's face as he absorbed George's words. There was a quiet dignity in her son's expression, a maturity that sometimes made her forget he was still just 15. "Because of Leo," George continued, "thousands of deaf and hard-of-hearing fans have been able to experience live music in new ways. And not just my music. The innovations we pioneered together have spread throughout the industry. That might be the legacy I'm most proud of, even more than the hit songs or the awards." As Elena translated, Leo's eyes grew moist. He had heard variations of this story many times over the years, had seen the impact of his influence spread, far beyond anything he could have imagined that night at the Riverdale Theatre. But hearing it from George Strait himself in this intimate setting, on the eve of his final concert, carried a special weight. "So, here's to Leo," George said, raising his glass higher. "Who taught an old cowboy that music isn't just what you hear, it's what you feel in your heart?" The room raised their glasses, all eyes on Leo, who blushed slightly at the attention, but held himself with the quiet confidence he had developed over the years. Elena watched her son, her heart swelling with pride and love. The boy who had once been defined by what he couldn't do was now being celebrated for how he had changed the world. After dinner, as they were preparing to leave, George pulled Leo aside for a private word. Elena stood nearby, translating, but giving them the space for a moment of connection. "I have something for you," George said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small box and handed it to Leo. "A little token to remember tomorrow night by." Leo opened the box carefully. Inside was a guitar pick, silver with George's initials engraved on one side. On the other side was a simple inscription: "Music finds a way." "I had it made special," George explained as Leo examined it with reverent fingers. "It's a replica of the pick I'll be using tomorrow night for my final show." Leo looked up, his eyes expressing what words could not. He carefully tucked the pick into his pocket, then signed, "I'll keep it forever." George nodded, understanding the depth of meaning in the simple gesture. The next day dawned clear and crisp, a perfect New York autumn day. Madison Square Garden was sold out with fans, having paid premium prices for tickets to George Strait's final concert. The atmosphere around the venue was electric, a mixture of celebration and nostalgia as fans gathered to bid farewell to a legend. Leo and Eleanor had seats in a special section near the stage, equipped with the now familiar vibration technology. Around them were other deaf and hard-of-hearing fans, many of whom recognized Leo from his advocacy work and approached him for autographs or photos. It still felt surreal to Elena, watching her son sign autographs, but Leo handled it with a modest grace that made her heart swell. As the lights dimmed and the crowd roared in anticipation, Elena watched Leo place his hands on the vibration panels, his face lighting up as he felt the energy of the audience through the subtle tremors running through the floor. This was a sensation he had come to love, the collective excitement of thousands of people translated into vibrations he could feel. The concert was magnificent, a career-spanning celebration of George Strait's unparalleled contribution to country music. He performed hit after hit, his voice as strong and clear as ever, despite his 73 years. The production was spectacular, with visual elements synchronized perfectly to the music, creating an immersive experience for all attendees. Midway through the show, George paused to address the audience. The crowd hushed as he stepped forward to the microphone. Many of you know that this tour, and the ones before it, have been dedicated to making music accessible to everyone, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the massive arena. That journey began with a special young man I met at a small theater show 5 years ago. A spotlight found Leo in the audience, illuminating him where he sat beside Elena. The crowd erupted in applause as his image appeared on the giant screens around the arena. Leo, now familiar with these moments, tipped his cowboy hat in acknowledgement, a gesture that brought a fresh wave of cheers. Leo Martinez taught me that music isn't just about what we hear, George continued. It's about what we feel, what moves us, what connects us to one another. And that lesson changed not just my approach to performing, but the entire industry's understanding of who music is for. As Elena translated, Leo watched George Strait intently, absorbing every word, with the same focus he had shown at that first concert 5 years ago. Tonight, for my final show, I want to honor that lesson with a song that has taken on special meaning for me over these past years. This one's for you, Leo. The band began to play I Saw God Today, the same song George had dedicated to Leo at that first concert. But there was a difference this time. As George sang, a team of dancers moved onto the stage, performing a choreographed interpretation of the song in American Sign Language. The movements were not just technically accurate translations of the lyrics, but artistically expressive, capturing the emotion and spirit of the music in a visual form. Leo watched mesmerized as the dancers brought the song to life in a language he understood instinctively. Beside him, Elena wiped tears from her eyes, overwhelmed by the beauty of the moment and all it represented. When the song ended, the arena erupted in thunderous applause. George Strait looked directly at Leo and tipped his cowboy hat, a gesture of respect between equals that transcended the difference in their ages and experiences. The remainder of the concert was a celebration of George Strait's legendary career, with surprise guest appearances from other country music stars who had been influenced by his work. Throughout it all, Leo remained fully engaged, his hands sometimes on the vibration panels, sometimes moving slightly in rhythm with the visual elements of the show, experiencing the music in his own unique way. As the concert drew to a close, George Strait performed his final song, The Cowboy Rides Away, a fitting farewell to his touring career. As the last notes faded, he stood center stage, hat in hand, visibly moved by the standing ovation that seemed to go on forever. Thank you for the music, for the memories, for letting me be a part of your lives all these years, he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. And thank you for learning with me that music truly is for everyone. With a final wave and a placement of his hat back on his head, George Strait left the stage, bringing to a close not just the concert, but an era in country music history. Backstage after the show, the atmosphere was charged with emotion. Crew members who had worked with George for decades embraced, some wiping away tears. Longtime band members reminisced about tours past. And in the midst of it all, George Strait sought out Leo and Elena. "I needed to say goodbye properly," he said when he found them, his face lined with the exertion of the performance, but his eyes bright. "And to thank you both one more time." Elena began to translate, but to her surprise, George began signing. Simple, somewhat clumsy signs, but recognizable. "Thank you, friend, music." Leo's face lit up with delight at George's effort. He signed back, his movements graceful and expressive. "Thank you for everything. You changed my life. I will never forget you." George didn't need Elena's translation to understand the emotion behind Leo's signs. He pulled Leo into a hug, then embraced Elena as well. "This isn't really goodbye," he said. "I'm retiring from touring, not from life. We'll stay connected." As they left Madison Square Garden that night, making their way through crowds of departing fans, many of whom recognized Leo and called out greetings, Elena felt a profound sense of completion. The journey that had begun with a radio contest, win and a difficult confrontation with a dismissive staff member had come full circle. Back at their hotel, as Leo carefully placed the silver guitar pick George had given him in the same case where he kept his original cowboy hat, Elena watched, a son with wonder. He had grown from a shy boy, defined by his deafness, to a confident young man who had helped reshape how the world thought about music and accessibility. "What are you thinking about?" she signed, when Leo looked up and caught her watching him. Leo's hands moved thoughtfully. "About how sometimes the best things come from the hardest moments," he signed. "If that man hadn't been mean to us that night, none of this might have happened." It was a thought he had expressed before, but Elena was struck again by the wisdom in it. "You've always been able to see the good that can come from difficulty," she signed back. "It's one of your gifts." Leo smiled. A young man's smile now, not a child's, but with the same essential sweetness that had always been his. "I've been thinking about what comes next," he signed. "After high school." Elena nodded encouragingly. Leo was a sophomore now, beginning to consider his future path. "And what are you thinking?" "I want to study music therapy," he signed, his movements decisive. "I want to help other deaf people connect with music the way I have, and maybe develop new technologies too." Eleanor felt a surge of pride. It was a perfect ambition for Leo, combining his unique perspective on music with his desire to help others. "You'll be wonderful at that," she signed. Leo nodded, then added, "And I want to keep my cowboy hat as a reminder of where it all started." Elena laughed. "I think that can be arranged." As they prepared for bed, Elena found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey they had taken together. What had begun as a simple desire to attend a concert had evolved into a movement that had transformed not just their lives, but the lives of countless others. Leo's unique perspective on music had opened doors that many had assumed were permanently closed, and it had all started with a mother's determination that her son should experience everything life had to offer, including the music he loved, and a boy's refusal to be limited by what he couldn't hear. The next morning, as they packed to return to Riverdale, Elena found Leo standing by the window, looking out over the New York skyline. She touched his shoulder gently to get his attention. "Ready to go home?" she signed. Leo nodded, then added, "I was just thinking about what George said last night, about music being for everyone." Eleanor waited, sensing there was more he wanted to express. "I think that's true about a lot of things," Leo continued, his signs thoughtful. "Most barriers, exist because we haven't figured out how to work around them yet, not because they're really impossible to cross. Elena looked at her son with wonder, struck by the maturity of his insight. The boy who had once been defined by what he couldn't do had become a young man, defined by his vision of what was possible. As they left the hotel, stepping out into the bright morning sunshine of New York City, Elena felt a profound sense of gratitude. The journey that had begun with that concert in Riverdale had been extraordinary, filled with unexpected turns and remarkable connections. But the most extraordinary part of all had been watching Leo grow into the thoughtful, determined young man who walked beside her now. His cowboy hat tilted at a confident angle, his step steady and sure as he moved toward whatever adventures awaited him next. What had started as one night of music had become a lifelong symphony, played not in notes that Leo could hear, but in vibrations he could feel. Vibrations that had reshaped his world and, in the process, changed the world for countless others. And that, Elena thought as they headed toward the airport and the flight that would take them home, was the most beautiful music of all.